Before sunrise, the Mongolian steppe can look like a country after humanity has disappeared. There are no fences, no traffic lights, and sometimes no building anywhere between one horizon and the other. Then the ground begins to move. A dark line becomes a herd, and hundreds of horses pour across the grass as if the landscape itself has come alive. Mongolia counted about 5.1 million horses at the end of 2025. Its human population is only about 3.5 million. There are not merely enough horses for every Mongolian. There are roughly 3 horses for every 2 people. Yet nearly half of those people live in a single crowded capital, while most of the horses remain under an open sky. That is the real Mongolia, one of the emptiest countries on Earth, carrying an ancient culture of movement into a future that is becoming increasingly urban. The number sounds like a charming piece of trivia, but it opens a much larger story. A horse in Mongolia is not simply an animal standing beside a picturesque tent. It is transport, memory, food, music, competition, status, and a way of reading the land. It helped make one of history's largest empires possible. And it still shapes family life centuries after mounted armies vanished from the steppe. But the same country that celebrates the horse is also gathering inside Ulaanbaatar, a city of apartment towers, traffic jams, coal smoke, shopping centers, and neighborhoods filled with traditional round homes. To understand why Mongolia has more horses than people, we have to understand why so much of Mongolian life was designed to move. Mongolia is enormous. It stretches across more than 1.5 million square kilometers between Russia and China, but it has fewer people than many ordinary world cities. Forests and lakes fill parts of the north. High mountains rise in the west. The Gobi spreads across the south, not as one endless sea of sand, but as a severe world of gravel plains, exposed rock, dry valleys, and grass that can disappear with the season. Much of the country is too cold, too dry, or too unpredictable for settled farming on a large scale. Grass, however, can turn sunlight into food for animals, and animals can move when the grass is gone. That is why a Mongolian herder is not simply wandering without direction. A pastoral family may move between spring, summer, autumn, and winter grounds, following routes shaped by water, wind, pasture, snowfall, and inherited knowledge. The decision to move can determine whether animals gain weight before winter or arrive weak when the cold closes in. Families know which valley offers shelter, where snow melts first, which grass recovers slowly, and which ground must be left alone. In 2024, UNESCO recognized Mongol nomad migration and its associated practices as living cultural heritage. The important word is not nomad, it is knowledge. At the center of this moving world is the dzud, the circular dwelling often called a yurt outside Mongolia. Its wooden frame can be taken apart, transported, and raised again. Layers of felt hold back the cold, the round shape resists the wind, and the opening above the stove allows smoke to escape. Inside, the space is compact but carefully ordered. The door traditionally faces south. The stove sits near the center. Family objects, saddles, tools, food, religious images, and modern electronics can occupy the same room without seeming contradictory. A dzud is not a primitive house waiting to become a permanent building. It is architecture created for a life in which home must be stable even when its location changes. The Mongolian horse was shaped by the same demands. It is smaller than the tall horses seen in European racing, but size is the wrong way to judge it. These horses are compact, strong, and able to live outdoors through conditions that would require intensive shelter elsewhere. They graze in large herds and often retain a semi-wild independence. A rider does not need an animal that looks elegant in a stable. A rider needs one that can cross rough ground, conserve energy, find food, and return to work the next day. On the steppe, endurance is a kind of beauty. The 5.1 million horses counted in 2025 do not mean that every city resident keeps one outside an apartment. They belong largely to herding households, and one family may manage dozens or hundreds of animals alongside sheep, goats, cattle, or camels. Horses help riders check scattered herds across distances that make walking impractical. They can reach animals over soft ground and broken terrain where a vehicle may struggle. Motorcycles are now common, but a motorcycle needs fuel parts and a surface it can cross. A horse can read uncertain ground beneath its feet, survive far from a road, and become part of the herd rather than an object imposed upon it. This relationship is older than the modern Mongolian state. Long before satellites drew borders across Central Asia, mounted communities used speed and mobility to connect enormous distances. Under Chinggis Khaan and his successors, Mongol armies became famous, not simply because their soldiers could ride, but because their entire system was organized around horses. Riders changed mounts, carried supplies, communicated across vast territory, and appeared where slower armies did not expect them. The horse did not create the Mongol Empire by itself, but without the horse, the empire as we remember it could not have existed. That history still lives in the language of national identity, but often in quieter forms. One of Mongolia's most recognizable instruments is the morin khuur, the horse-head fiddle. Its neck is crowned by a carved horse, and horsehair has traditionally been used in its strings and bow. Its sound can be low and spacious, almost like a voice traveling across a long valley. The instrument is played in homes, ceremonies, concerts, and stories. In many traditional legends, it is created from grief for a beloved horse. The animal becomes music, and memory is given a body that can sing. The horse also enters the home through airag, fermented mare's milk. During the milking season, fresh milk is cooled and churned repeatedly in a leather vessel called a khuur, using a small amount of an earlier batch to begin fermentation. Airag can be offered to guests, shared at celebrations, and used in blessings. The process is practical, social, and ceremonial at the same time. A mare standing outside the jur becomes a drink passed from one person to another, binding the herd to hospitality. Then, every summer, the relationship becomes a national spectacle. Naadam is built around three traditional competitions: wrestling, archery, and horse racing. The races are not short sprints around a carefully groomed oval. Depending on the age of the horses, they can stretch across long distances of open country. The finish is a storm of dust, hooves, shouting, and riders leaning close to their animals. The winning horse is praised in song. Even the last horse in a young age category may be honored with words of encouragement because the meaning of the race reaches beyond victory. The riders are often children, a tradition that produces both pride and serious debate about safety. That tension matters because living culture is never perfectly frozen. Helmets, regulations, training, animal welfare, and the future of child participation are discussed precisely because Naadam is not a museum performance. It is still important enough for people to argue over. Mongolia is constantly deciding which parts of tradition express identity, which parts need protection, and which parts must change. Outside the festival, modern herding life is already full of combinations that outsiders rarely imagine. A jur may have a solar panel leaning beside it, charging phones and powering a television. A herder may ride a motorcycle in the morning, check weather information on a smartphone, and use a horse later when the terrain becomes difficult. Trucks carry a dismantled jur to new pasture, replacing some of the wooden carts used in earlier generations. None of this automatically ends nomadic culture. A culture disappears when its knowledge and relationships lose their purpose, not when someone acquires a battery or an engine. The sharper transformation is happening in Ulaanbaatar. Nearly half of Mongolia's citizens now live in and around the capital. The contrast with the steppe is immediate. Roads are crowded, apartment blocks rise beside offices and shopping centers. In winter, cold air can trap pollution over the city. On surrounding hills, jur districts spread far beyond the central grid, home to families living in jurs or simple houses, many without the same heating and infrastructure available in established neighborhoods. These districts reveal that moving to the city does not always mean leaving the old world neatly behind. A family can bring its jur, its furniture, its rituals, and its memories from the countryside, then rebuild that home on an urban plot. The structure still works, but the system around it has changed. On open pasture, smoke from one stove disappears into an immense sky. In a dense winter neighborhood, thousands of stoves burning fuel can become a public health crisis. The same architecture that made movement possible must now function in a city that was never prepared to absorb so many people so quickly. People arrive for many reasons: education, medical care, stable services, family connections, and opportunities that may be impossible to reach from a remote district. Some also arrive after losing animals. Mongolia has a word for the kind of disaster that can destroy a herder's life: dzud. It is not merely an ordinary cold winter drought, may weaken the grass during summer, then deep snow or a layer of ice can block animals from reaching what remains. Extreme cold finishes what hunger began. During the devastating winter of 2023 and 2024, more than 8 million livestock were lost. Numbers that large can sound abstract, but for a herding family, the loss is intimate. A herd may carry decades of breeding decisions and nearly every resource the household possesses. When the animals die, the family does not simply lose this year's production. it can lose the foundation that allows life on the land to continue. A young person who moves to Ulaanbaatar after a dzud may be described as part of urbanization. But behind that clean statistical word may be a frozen pasture, an empty corral, and a family that no longer has enough animals to rebuild. Climate pressure makes this conflict more urgent. Mongolia has always experienced brutal weather, yet rising temperatures, drought, pasture degradation, and increasingly destructive extremes make traditional decisions harder. At the same time, a very large national herd can place additional stress on fragile grasslands. Mobility once allowed pasture to rest, but fences, roads, settlement, administrative boundaries, and competition for good land can restrict the routes that made the system resilient. The answer is not as simple as keeping more animals or moving everyone into cities. It depends on preserving enough healthy land for movement to remain possible. This is why the phrase "more horses than people" can be misleading if it is treated only as something exotic. Mongolia is not an empty stage where animals outnumber civilization. The apparent emptiness contains seasonal routes, sacred places, wells, winter shelters, family histories, and boundaries that may be invisible to a visitor. A valley with no building can still be known in extraordinary detail. Its grass may have a remembered owner in practice, its water a history, and its safest passage a name passed between generations. Nor does urban life erase the horse. City families return to the countryside to visit relatives, celebrate holidays, race, ride, and reconnect with the land. Naadam fills stadiums and television screens. Children who grow up among traffic may still learn songs about horses or hear the morin khuur at ceremonies. Airag travels into the capital. The deal, Mongolia's traditional robe, appears at festivals, weddings, and formal occasions. Identity moves in both directions, from the steppe to the city and back again. In 2026, this conversation has become global. The United Nations designated the year as the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists after an initiative led by Mongolia. The choice is revealing. Mongolia is not asking the world to admire nomads as survivors from a vanished age. It is asking people to recognize that mobile herding remains a living system, and that the knowledge behind it may matter in a century of climate uncertainty. The future of the steppe will depend on better disaster preparation, healthier pasture, and ways for families to access education and services without being forced to surrender their connection to the land. The most important choice is not between tradition and modernity. Mongolians made that combination long ago. The real choice is whether modernization can leave room for movement. A horse culture cannot survive only as a festival costume if the pasture routes disappear. A dzud cannot remain part of a living pastoral system if it exists only as emergency housing on the edge of a polluted city, and the knowledge of when to move, where to rest, and how to survive a hard season cannot be preserved by photographs alone. It must continue to be used. So when a herd crosses the Mongolian horizon, the remarkable thing is not simply that there are more horses than people. It is that each animal belongs to a human system built around distance, uncertainty, and cooperation. The herd explains why the home can move, why the landscape can look empty while remaining deeply inhabited, why an ancient instrument carries a horse on its neck, and why a modern capital still cannot escape the rhythms of the grasslands surrounding it. Mongolia's future will not look exactly like its past. Fewer people may spend every season on horseback, more children will grow up in apartments, study online, and build lives far from the pasture. Yet the horse is unlikely to become merely a symbol. As long as families still move animals across open land, as long as Naadam sends dust into the summer air, and as long as the sound of the morin khuur can make a crowded room feel as wide as the steppe, the old relationship remains alive. 5 million horses and 3.5 million people. The statistic first sounds like a joke about an empty country. By the end, it means something else. It describes a civilization that learned to make distance habitable, to carry home across the grass, and to survive by moving before the land was exhausted. Mongolia may be gathering in one city, but beyond that city, millions of hooves are still writing the map.